All right, hi everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think people are still going to be filtering in. It looks like we've got most everyone on for now. So I just wanted to start by introducing myself. My name is Olivia Basham. I am the Director of Marketing for SaferMobility. We wanted to thank you for joining us today for our discussion. We are very fortunate to have two incredible experts with us today. We've got Kevin Mullins, who is the CEO of SaferMobility. He comes with decades of experience in banking, technology, compliance, and mobile safety innovation. And we also have Chief Terry Nichols, who is a nationally recognized active shooter expert, author, and co-founder of ALERRT, which is the country's leading training center for active attack response. Today, we're going to be exploring practical ways for banks and credit unions to strengthen safety and preparedness through our modern technology and through proven strategies, including experience with Kevin and Terry in their field. We're going to cover everything from reducing risks during branch opening and closings, ensuring compliance with the Bank Protection Act, and hopefully you'll walk away with some insights on today's biggest safety challenges. So we do have a lot to cover, and we are going to open up the chat for questions. If you do have any, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we will go ahead and get those answered towards the end of our webinar today. So, Chief Nichols, I'd like to start with you. First question we have for you is, from your experience, what are the top three mistakes that organizations make when they're preparing for active threats?
Thank you. A great question, Olivia, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And just to qualify, I'm retired chief. Also refer to myself as a recovering chief of police. But now I'll probably say first on the list is it will never happen here attitude. If you were to ask any more than 600 locations across the country where attacks have happened since 2010, I think each one of them would likely tell you, I never thought something like this would happen here. The data tells us these tragic events occur in businesses more frequently than in any other places. 45% of these events happen versus schools and places of worship. So that's kind of the first thing I think. Second, I would say failing to provide employees with training about active threats and how to respond. And it's not just the physical act of what will I do, which is important. The physical piece is important, but also really important is the communication alert process within the organization. How will my staff know there's a threat? There's a real world example from the tragic shooting at the Old National Bank in Louisville, Kentucky, back in April 2023. During that attack on the bank, the shooter was in the bank lobby looking for additional victims. Two civilians actually came down the elevator from an upper floor into the lobby, not knowing there had been an attack going on for 5 minutes in the lobby area on the ground floor. They exited in the lobby, and the suspect shot at them and luckily missed as they fled. So that was a near miss. I guess lastly, I would say probably not practicing and training in the processes for an active threat. As professionals, it shouldn't be just a one-time check the box type of training. Practice getting up and locking a door. Arrange office space to have something available to block the door in case you can't lock your door. You can send a test emergency notification message out if you have that capability. And make sure it's a test so nobody overreacts or 911 calls don't go out. But that way, you make it prearranged that they know it's coming sometime in the day. So if they're at the copy machine and the message comes out, my action will be much different than when I was in my office, say. What if I have a customer client in my office? What would I do at this given point? So practice does not have to be complex or scary. We want everybody to be emergency prepared, not emergency scared. And I'd say that's probably the top three.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I especially liked the check the box. Like it's not a one-time thing. It's got to be a continued process. So thank you for that. So how important would you say is coordination with local law enforcement for financial institutions specifically, and how should banks go about structuring that relationship in your opinion?
The answer is coordination, ongoing relationships is very important. I mean, it's as simple as that part. But having it said that, every community is different. No doubt about that. Policing in Chicago and Dallas or Orlando is much different than policing in Seguin, Texas, my old agency, or Hammond, Louisiana, for example, or Camden, South Carolina, some of the smaller communities across the nation. And when I say different, I'm simply referring to the size of the community, not to, the policing practices, as it were. It's usually much easier to build, create, and maintain those professional relationships in smaller communities across America. I've found anyway. In San Marcos, San Marcos, Texas, where I spent my first 21 years, we had wonderful relationships with our institutions. I'd say we're a mid-sized community, 60,000. And when I was commander over our detectives, we created a working group that met monthly with law enforcement agencies and financial institutions stringing from San Antonio to Austin. Now, and we were in the middle, so we were a natural meeting spot. This was born out of an ongoing series of violent robberies that we had, and we called the group the BRIC, Bank Robbery Initiative Consortium. But the group's direction quickly pivoted as we continued to meet and went to all crime-related issues, from forgeries, ATM thefts, fraud, and everything in between we started talking about. But there were no walls or no barriers to communication, and it was great to be able to pick up the phone and talk to someone I knew, or for them to pick up the phone and call me, a commander from the police department, 24/7 on my cell phone with a question or concern they might have. So yeah, those relationships are critically important, and we can talk later on a little bit, maybe some ways that you can facilitate those.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. What lessons from police training programs can banks apply to improve that staff preparedness and response that you're speaking of?
As it relates to active threats, I think most local law enforcement agencies provide free training to communities for best practices for civilians, response strategies. In the best case scenario, we honestly prevent these events from occurring in the first place through intervention early on. And if someone's making threats, we have to take action on those now. The days of, oh, that's just Dan being Dan, he didn't mean it, or you see something on Instagram or social media or TikTok that someone is saying something outside the bounds, the norms, the days of us not reporting that are long gone. We have to stay on that. And I encourage people to make sure and push that throughout their organizations. For actual training, model programs like Avoid, Deny, Defend, or Run, Hide, Fight are offered at no cost across the country. We, as on the ground floor, developing the Avoid, Deny, Defend protocol while at the ALERRT program at Texas State University. And we filmed a training video in partnership with Walmart, which is available for free on YouTube. You can just search Avoid, Deny, Defend on YouTube, and you'll see that video pop up. Which actually reminds me of a point I want to circle back to. I said about half the events that occur across the nation occur at places of business. And tragically, Walmart stores across the country, as well as other retailers, I'm not just singling out Walmart anyway, but other retailers as well, they've been sites of numerous ones of these attacks. And for financial institutions, banks and credit unions, I know that many have small branches in these big box stores. Now, having said that, they can be potential violent targets of violent events as well. So I would encourage anyone that if you have a branch in one of these type of locations, to closely work with the host business, as it were, and ensure your employee response procedures are in sync with theirs, or what might be different or what may be conflicting. Because in a time of emergency is not the time to figure that out. That's something we need to work on way in advance. If you need this type of training, I'd encourage you to reach out to your local law enforcement or sheriff's department and inquire and see if if they can help you. If not, feel free to reach out to me. Olivia's going to put contact information for Kevin and I both in the chat, and I'll be happy to help facilitate that conversation, that local conversation. But it's never too late to take that first step.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry. And thank you for all the insight you've given us from your experience. And we're going to go ahead. I know we were kind of speaking about technology. I know that's a perfect lead into Kevin. So we're going to go ahead and turn to Kevin for some questions. Kevin, how can financial institutions use mobile safety platforms to meet compliance and also reduce liability?
It's a good question, Olivia. Thank you. And I'll say this: it's a pleasure to be on this this webinar with Terry. So I've got the utmost respect that he's such an expert, and so I feel honored to be here. We're talking about technology and banking, and you talk about from a security standpoint, you have to look at how the bank branch has evolved. A few years ago, we were talking about branch transformation or branch of the future with universal bankers and branches being very, very different. That has all evolved kind of through COVID. Banking changed very differently. Crime trends changed within the banking industry, and you've seen technology change so much. Branch structures look very, very different now than they did just a few years ago. As Terry said, he was a recovering police chief. I'm a recovering banker. And it's very different branches now compared to where they were just a few years ago. And it's a very open type environment. 10 years ago, the average branch size was 4,500 square feet. Now the average branch size is 2,500 square feet. So it's a smaller branch. It's a very open environment. And the other piece too is you have 50% less employees in that bank branch. Why is that? Because we're using less and less cash every day, but that doesn't mean that you have less and less risk every day. So as the branch structure has evolved, different types of crimes and risks have opened up in terms of like parking lot crime. So parking lot crime is actually up 38% over that period of time. So you're seeing a shift from inside the branch to in the parking lot. There's an example of the bank in Michigan had an employee assaulted at closing time in the parking lot. We're seeing all of these things that are happening that are very differently, but as technology has evolved in the branch, we're now using almost every branch has some type of a teller cash recycler, which is a machine. All of our bankers know that it's processing cash. A teller cash recycler can do the work of about 3.5 employees. So as that employee count comes down, you think we've always had strength in numbers, but as those numbers decrease, what are you doing as a security officer to be able to mitigate or manage that risk? And it's leveraging technology. It's leveraging solutions to be able to make those employees safer. I think that's something that we really have to look at. We look at the Bank Protection Act. That's the core of our solution. That's the Bible that we all go through. And when I say banks, I mean banks and credit unions. I'm going to use that term kind of synonymously. It's all the financial services industry. But when you look at what the law says, there are 5 components really to the Bank Protection Act. And the requirements are you have to have a security officer, right? You have to have a written plan. You have to have reporting associated with it. You have to have an opening and a closing process. And then you have to have training. And speaking specifically to opening closing, how technology layers into that, that's when employees are the most vulnerable. That's when you have these types of events where employees are going in and out of the building. And so being able to utilize technology to layer in, to using interactive video tellers, using other technologies out there, it's essential that the bank evolve, that the security officer evolves to be able to meet what those new needs are. And if you haven't really changed your procedures, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, really updating your practices, your policies, and your procedures, you're opening yourself up potentially to liability or risk to your employees, risk to your customers, and risk to the assets within the institution.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. So now that we're talking about compliance and risk and how that fits into the technology we have today, your product, Safe Banker, where does technology like Safe Banker fit into the larger compliance framework, especially under the Bank Protection Act?
Well, if you look at the Bank Protection Act, and I'll step back, and we talk about our technology, and it's very difficult to explain just within an elevator speech or explaining what the technology is. So I mentioned the Bank Protection Act. It talks about an opening and a closing process. That's where we really layer in. And a little banking 101, for folks that may not necessarily be fully involved on this call, is how it typically works. And it hasn't changed since 1968. That's when Bank Protection Act passed. There's a process where one employee will pull in the parking lot, will sit there, another employee will pull in, and then employee number 1 will go inside the building and perform certain things to open that branch to make sure that it's safe. Because again, that's the most vulnerable time of day for that bank branch. And they'll give a signal. And that signal is typically a window shade, or it's a card in the window, or it's a sock monkey, or a gumball machine, or an umbrella on the door. And all of these signals, the problem you run into with that is, when you look at the commentary to the law and you look at the examination materials, and examiners are becoming much more involved now in physical security within the institution. But what those examination materials and the commentary say, that process has to be rotated, it has to be audited, and it has to be non-visible to the public. So the problem with that is, how can you take a card in the window and say that that's not visible to the public. There's a TikTok challenge out there right now to go sit in front of a bank or a credit union branch in the morning and just see what their all clear signal is and then just post it out there. And if the public can do that, one, you're putting your people at risk. You're putting the reputation of the institution at risk. And you're also opening yourself up to a lot of liability. And so what our technology does is we layer into that process. So we layer into the new branch structure. We say, smart banks made safer. And that's exactly what we do. So if you're operating, you have interactive video tellers, you have teller cash recyclers, you have all of these processes. But if you're still working in 1968 and you're still hanging, that card in the window, there's a problem. And it's definitely something to think about. There's a better way to do this. And it's not just opening and closing. It's compliance and audit, and there are HR components. You have disaster recovery, contingency planning. A huge piece of what our technology is having an emergency notification system. Terry mentioned earlier about, customers coming down into a situation where there was an active threat in the building. It had been happening for some period of time, but if you don't have a communication channel, and again, whether it's SafeBanker or another platform, it doesn't matter, but you need something to let people know. That's normally, when situations get bad, when someone's coming in and they get surprised, when the victim gets surprised, when the assailant gets surprised, bad things happen. And you have an obligation not only to protect your people, but in this case, it was customers that could have been alerted to say, hey, we have an active threat in this building, we need to stop. And so those are things that we really need to layer into. And that's a lot of, like, our technology. Again, I don't want it to sound so salesy, and I don't want this to be like a commercial, but I'm just saying, whether it's SafeBanker or whether it's another solution on the market, you need to think about, you need to have an emergency notification system, regardless of your bank size, regardless of number of branches out there, regardless of budget. You've got to have these are minimum standards to protect yourself, protect your people, and just being able to, again, mitigate liability to the institution or anyone as a security officer on this call. We have to look at doing things the right way. We're going into 2026. We can't be doing the same thing we did in 1968.
Absolutely. And, you hear people talk about the branch of the future. So, given the branch of the future is here, how do you see branch safety transforming in the next 5 years? What does that look like, and what are the expectations there?
You're going to see a lot. I mean, there's a lot of, it's evolving so fast right now. When you're looking at ALPR technologies, that are looking at parking lots, when you're trying to catch incidents of kiting, or you're catching other kind of swatting incidents, or people, jumping, check hopping, and all of these things, being able to capture that information. Think about if you have a customer and they go to one or two of your branches, in a day, that's okay. If they go to 5 or 6, there's something going on. And so utilizing AI and other technologies to kind of capture that. But then once you capture that, you need a communication tool. So how can you get information to your staff as quickly and responsibly as possible? Right now, real safety is getting the right information to the right people as soon as you can. And that's very much where you see things going. I mean, there's a push now in the government, they do a great job of creating acronyms. And so the new, from a security officer standpoint, is called KIREA. And basically that's covering what you should be protecting as a security officer, within your institution. And KIREA stands for customer information, reputation, employees, and assets. And that's really what you have to be looking at, and technology into those processes to be able to, again, mitigate risk and being able to, protect those people. And the interesting piece is now you're seeing security as an ROI. So you think about being able to build efficiencies into processes, and that's what a lot of these technologies do. So now where you're very kind of, human capital driven, or it takes 2 people to open a branch, or it takes 2 people to get into a vault. Now this can go to a single person opening process, or sole control over that vault and that asset. And so just becoming more efficient. And I know some institutions that have really advanced forward are seeing, a 5-to-1 ROI. So meaning that every dollar that they spend on technology for security, because of the efficiency are seeing $5 coming back. So that's a great standpoint when you're a security officer and you're trying to get budget for what you do, to be able to say, let me show you how we can make our institution safer. Let me show you how we can limit liability, but we can also add to our ROA at the end of the year. And so I think that's a great tool to look at. And, you know, when you look at kind of processes and kind of industry standards are excluding personnel and interest expense, 5% of the budget should be going towards security of the institution. And you can combine that cyber and physical. A lot of institutions do, a lot of institutions don't. They classify those separately, but you need to have budget. You need to understand what's out there, and then how you can layer in technology in your security processes, again, to make everyone safer. Ultimately, it's about protecting that most important asset, and that's your people.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. And I know we're running low on time, so if you do have to drop out, that's okay. But we are going to answer one more question. And I want to bring both of you in for this, so feel free to kind of attack it together. But how do banks go about striking the balance between creating a safe environment for staff and customers without creating that fear and disruption?
I'll jump on it. I think I'd reiterate something I mentioned earlier about focus on being emergency prepared and not emergency scared. You know, any active threat training you provide your staff is just as applicable away from work as it is at work. It's something that happened, you know, that they need to be aware of emergency preparedness anywhere they go, not just at the job. So that's something they can transition out. You know, there's also great research out there that shows an employer or workplace that prioritizes safety, both physical and psychological, promotes employee commitment, achievement, and overall job performance. Some other research shows best practices for employee safety include leadership commitment, supported policies, transparent communications, and opportunities for participation. So there's lots of good reasons. You know, for customers, hopefully they're seeing great customer service from being welcomed into a branch, having someone make eye contact with them, and handling their business without an incident. All these safety processes Kevin talked about, I've been talking about, training, employee practicing that we're doing, they're all running in the background, and they're completely invisible to the customer absent a critical incident happening. If something does happen, a well-trained, prepared staff, they're going to fall back on their training and respond appropriately.
I'll jump in on it too. And Terry, you're exactly right. I mean, the key, I think, I know we don't have a lot of time, Olivia, but it's training. It's getting your folks, having the resources, making sure that you as a security officer, if that's your role within your institution, having access to your board of directors and having the ability to have budget and to make things happen. And it's interesting, I'm in a conference right now and I was talking to a banker. They were asking a question, and this banker said, you know, I'm not a full-time security officer, but I think I really should be. And I'm very busy, but I don't necessarily have the time to be able to kind of, you know, get out and train everyone. Our institution talks about, you know, we have a culture of security, and that was part of what their message is out to everyone. I said, well, you know, explain to me, let's talk about your institution. And she explained that it's a 21 branch bank with 4 billion in assets. And I said, you're not a full-time. No, we don't have a full-time security officer. And my point to her was, I would quit. Like, I would not handle that level of responsibility without the resources and the assets to do so. It's very dangerous. And so I think getting back to that original question, you've got to have the ability to do your job. You know, again, was getting back to the budget, you know, component that we were speaking about. With this employee that I was talking to, was asking him, like, when you're presenting your plan, when you're presenting to your board of directors, like, it is something that's where you definitely need that access. And she said, I feel like when I present to my board, I'm just basically getting shuffled out. I've got a very limited amount of time, and I'm getting pushed out. I said, you can't do that. You've got to be able to have access to your board. You have to ultimately build them the understanding, because when you look at the Bank Protection Act, what it says specifically, who is responsible for the bank's security program? The board of directors. Yes, there is a daily manager. And as a former board member of a financial institution, I can tell you there's a lot of liability sitting out there. And so those are things that really kind of just a last thought, have the resources, have the assets, utilize technology, and build a security program of something that you're very, very proud of, and something that you can stand up and you can sleep well at night, knowing that you're doing all that you can to protect, again, your staff, your customers, and the assets of the institution.
Well, Chief Nichols, Kevin, thank you both so much for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you for everyone who joined us. Like I said before, if you do have any questions, feel free. Their emails are dropped in the question and answer chat. So they'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. If you did drop another question that we didn't get to today, we'll also be sure to answer that. We'll message you privately. But on behalf of SaferMobility, thank you for spending time with us. We also will be sending out a recording of our session today and any additional resources. So thank you again. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.